That's right, folks. Another episode of the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Bobby LaMarco. Today, we're diving into another division of our players with the most to gain or lose segments. Today is the NFC South. We're here to touch on some key guys like Tyler Allgeier, the new hotness, Derek Carr down in New Orleans. We're going to be breaking down a bunch of new players in their new teams and why they have the most to gain or lose from the NFL draft. Before we do, make sure you follow us across the board at Razzball Fantasy on YouTube, IG, and TikTok. And of course, make sure you jump over to razzball.com, folks. We're doing some great work over there on the baseball, hockey, basketball, and of course, football side. So we have all the content you need to win your fantasy league, no matter what fantasy league you do. But today's show, we're here to break down the 5 players in the NFC South that have the most to gain from the NFL draft, starting right now. Pretty much anything to deal with the South, whether it's AFC or NFC, you got to bring in Keelan Blue. And you can follow at Keelan_12-foot on Twitter. What's going on, Keelan?
Not much, Bobby. That's right. I'm back again for the South, representing the South. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I'm here.
Well, the craziest part, I feel like at some point I got to get you on for the West, North, or East, because I feel like we only talk about the South. But you know what?
That's true.
That's your sweet spot. And
that
there's
is.
nothing wrong with
my
that.
Comfort zone.
I know.
Which is sad.
Yeah. Well, it's starting to look a little better for you. I remember our episode a couple months ago, we were very sad about the outlook for these South divisions. It's starting to get a little better. And I think today's show is going to kind of help us kind of talk to that through that. And a lot of today's show, just like we've talked about for weeks, guys, if you're new to the show, essentially today we're talking about current players on the teams in the NFC South that could gain a lot of value in fantasy football, essentially, if the draft goes the right way. So a lot of guys, running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks, tight ends, you name it. If the team doesn't select a wide receiver, running back, etc., does their value go up? And the same thing for quarterbacks. Do they get more weapons, etc.? So that's what today's show is really about. Let's get right into it. At number 5, at this point, I feel like the head of the fan club, Olamide Zaccheaus, is Keelan Blue. Keelan, talk to us why he has the most to gain or lose in the NFL draft.
I know. I'm always talking about him. He's awesome. But also, I think we talked a few months ago, like you mentioned, about some of those free agency things, some of the salary cap things that were going on. And one of these was Zaccheaus. He's become a free agent. He still is a free agent. So obviously with Atlanta, they have Drake London, so they have their guy there, but the rest of the receiving squad is kind of lacking. Zaccheaus, he had his best season last year, but the question is, will they continue on with him? Or will they draft somebody to maybe potentially replace him? I've seen a few different things. It looks like they probably will bring him back, but there is also still, we never know with these draft things. People do crazy things. But, it could be something where they pivot either with getting, shoring up their wide receivers, or maybe even getting a quarterback, which could also change that situation for him if they end up, not continuing ahead with Desmond Ridder. So I've thread a few different things for him, maybe he'll stay. Some people are leaning that way, but then also, it might be that he moves to the Eagles or the Steelers, where he is knocked down a little in the depth of the roster. So especially for the dynasty folks who have him, that might affect him, or anybody that has him really. So yeah, that's going to be a really big thing for him. There's just a lot of moving pieces still for him that make it sort of difficult to see right now where he's going to land.
Yeah, and I think with Zaccheaus too, they got Matt Collins, Scotty Miller, Cardell Hodge. Really. So there's definitely an opportunity here. Jonnu Smith's also on board as well. So there is definitely some improvement options of it. He could definitely earn maybe that number 3 spot behind London and Pitts in this offense. Let's jump down to number 4. It's same team, Tyler Allgeier. So when I want to talk about Tyler Allgeier is because I wanted to dive into his numbers last year, because Cordell Patterson was one of those very confusing fantasy players because he was super good when he got the touches, and then just for some reason he stopped getting touches. And the reason why was because of this young rookie named Tyler Allgeier. So first off, I do like the fact that Taylor Heinicke is on the team. Taylor Heinicke has proven time and time again that he is he's a not a great starter, but he's a league average starter. And if Desmond Ridder does not make improvements this offseason, I have faith that if they don't go to Taylor Heineke, that this offense will be solid and maybe even better than last year than Mariota. That being said, it does really rely on Desmond Ridder. Does he take the next step in this offense? Because they ran the ball insanely well last year. If you look at the numbers last year, just from top to bottom, they were top 5 in PFF offensive line rankings, number 1 in run blocking. They returned 4 of their 5 offensive line starters from last year. So that is big news for this offensive line. I wrote 4 of 4 for some reason on my notes. I think it's 5 of 5. So I'm going to say they've returned all 5, but I will get back to you on that. I'm pretty sure it's 5 of 5. I'm very confused about my notes. I was a little tired last night when I wrote this. But anyway, there's more continuity on the offensive coaching staff. Now, there is still Cordell Patterson on the roster, so there is always that in the back of your mind. If this team's competitive, does that mean CPAT still gets work? But just take a look at the final 9 games for Tyler Allgeier, okay? He averaged 79 yards per game, 86.6 total, so with receiving and rushing, and he averaged 11.2 PPR points per game. That would have been RB 30 last year. Not too bad. The final 4 weeks, okay, those numbers jumped to 107 rushing yards per game, 120 total, and 16.6 PPR points per game. That would have been RB 8 last year. So he showed down that last month of the season he could produce at a top 10 running back level. Currently today, he's going at RB 29, 83rd overall. So I think the upside for Tyler Allgeier for fantasy football. And I'm going to be really interested to see if the Falcons kind of lean into him this year, or if they go out and maybe get a day 2 running back as well. Let's jump down to number 3. It's Derek Carr, the New Orleans Saints, the new look quarterback, probably the best quarterback in the NFC South. So talk to us a little bit about Carr and why you're excited for him this offseason.
Yeah. So I think, again, back when we talked about the salary cap stuff, this is not necessarily something we saw coming. And then the Saints have made a lot of other moves. I think it was just this week. They added Jamal Williams, which was huge, especially considering we don't know what's going on with Alvin Kamara and how that's going to end up working out. But we also talked about that receiving area and how they don't really have that much depth. Chris Olave has done wonderful, so that's awesome. And then we have Rashid Shaheed, but then, Michael Thomas is back, but is he really back? We don't know. So in terms of targets for Derek Carr, that's an area where it is like, if they, that's an area they could draft in, or maybe a tight end, because, with their tight ends right now, they have just kind of a bunch of like makeshift guys that are like, yeah, sure, these are tight ends. Taysom Hill, I feel like we're going to see him a little more there this year than in the past, since he's been doing his weird platooning stuff. So I think, hopefully that'll be something that will be a gain for Derek Carr, is if they get a wide receiver, maybe that'll come in the later rounds. I've seen some talk about Jason Brownlee, who is out of Southern Miss. So that could be something interesting. But yeah, that could be something huge just for Derek Carr to have more depth with the receivers, more targets for him to throw to. And I feel like the outlook is positive for that. I think it's going to happen.
Yeah, and you want that safety net, especially with Michael Thomas, just hasn't been able to stay healthy. And granted, if Thomas, Olave are your 2 starting receivers, and then Juwan Johnson at tight end, that's not terrible.
Yeah.
And they might lose Alvin Kamara. So do they look at a running back potentially for long-term if they know Kamara is going to get suspended? A lot of moving parts there for Derek Carr, but it does look like he does have some decent weapons on the surface. Let's jump down to number 2, Rachaad White. So Rachaad White, when I always talk about this stuff, at least the biggest thing with him is the new OC change. But it's not just that. It's like new quarterback, new OC, offensive line is all changing. And so I wanted to take a look at Rachaad White and Dave Canales, who comes in from Seattle. There's a lot of excitement, and reason why I'm excited for Rachaad White if, for example, the Bucs don't pivot. It doesn't sound like they will. They only brought in Chase Edmonds so far, and they released Leonard Fournette. So right there, there's a lot of opportunity for him. And with Dave Canales has proven that they will lean on a running back. So I want to just talk about this. When you look at the 17-game pace for the 13 seasons that he was in Seattle, the running backs had. So they averaged 266 attempts per season, 17-game pace, 304 touches, 1,400 yards, 11.5 touchdowns, 14.3 PPR points per game. That would have been RB 15 last year. So Dave Canales has been a part of plenty of coaching staffs with Marshawn Lynch, Chris Carson, you name it, even Kenneth Walker, that proves high-level talent for fantasy football. So I'm excited for him, for Dave Canales. The other thing is Baker versus Kyle Trask. Now, I'm not saying Baker only got $4 million. That's not starter money. So this is definitely a coin flip. But they're both starting from scratch. And Baker might have the leg up in the system because Dave Canales coached under Shane Waldron, who coached under Sean McVay, who Baker learned under last year. However, Kyle Trask might have a little bit of a leverage with the players because he's been there with Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, K-Dot, and etc. So there is something there. However, there's a big-time shakeup on the offensive line. They released Shaq Mason and Donovan Smith. This team was ninth overall in PFF grades, but they were 25th in run blocking. They were awful. The only good news is that Ryan Jensen, their stud, like all-pro, Pro Bowl level center, should be back this season, so that should help. But just to kind of circle back on all this too, is there was one game last year without Leonard Fournette. He had a decent game, Rachaad White, 14 carries, 64 yards, 9 targets, 9 receptions, 45 yards in the receiving game. Of course, that's Tom Brady. So I think there's a lot to unpack here. I think that if, for example, they invest a little in the offensive line, they don't sign a day one or day two running back, I would like, because right now today he's going 81st overall, RB 28, just ahead of Tyler Allgeier, who I just talked about. So a lot of value for Rachaad White. And a lot of that value is going to tie to who wins that quarterback battle, who, by the way, is our number one on this list. Baker Mayfield versus Kyle Trask. Talk to us, Keelan, about this and why you think this is extremely important for the NFL draft.
Well, first of all, I knew both you and I were super interested in this, so I'm glad it's number one. It's fascinating. So, yeah, we've talked about this before in the past. Bucs signed Baker Mayfield, and he and Kyle Trask are now competing for that job. But yeah, I don't, just like you said, $4 million is not starter money. It's not a long-term solution. So I think, yeah, the big question probably everybody is wondering is, are they going to draft a more long-term option, or will this person end up becoming a shorter-term option because who knows, something blows up in everybody's face? We don't know. Or, are they going to pick up one in free agency? So, yeah, I think just in general, that situation is still, we don't even know who's going to be the starter. And then long term, we don't know how that's going to work out or who they're going to draft. So in general, that's just like huge question mark. That's going to impact, as you pointed out, that whole team. It leaves a bunch of question marks right now. So super fascinating. And I'm just very excited to continue watching it, honestly.
In reality, when I actually looked into this, I was like really down on the Tampa Bay Bucs offensive line. And then I looked into the research and with PFF grades, and somehow they actually skewed towards the pass blocking. They're actually pretty good. And actually, when I came out of this, I'm like, it's on the quarterback. Because if you look at the situation, they have a very good situation. Dave Canales, who, by the way, is a former QB coach, former passing game coordinator, and has learned under a guy like Shane Waldron, who under that Sean McVay scheme, but he's a passing game guy. The other thing is they were 4th in the NFL in pass blocking last year. And maybe some of that has to do with Tom Brady's ability to get the ball out of his hands quickly. But those two things. And then on top of that, you have Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, Russell Gage, K-Dot, and Rachaad White. I mean, like we've talked about, I forget who else talked about this earlier, but there's 5 players that you're probably going to get drafted in fantasy right there. K-Dot is a sleeper. Yeah. Russell Gage is a dart throw. Maybe not so much anymore because it's Baker Mayfield, but whoever wins that job has a very good situation. It could find themselves on a 2 QB league super flex map as an underrated asset. But any final thoughts about any of our top 5 before we close out the show?
No, it's looking better. The outlook is positive.
It is, right? I told you. I said that. I said at the end of the show, you're going to feel a little bit better about the South. And I'm starting to get I like it. Let's end on a high note, some positive. Thank you once again for joining us. This is the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe. Leave a comment. Who did we leave out? Should we have talked about Michael Thomas? Should we have talked about a Panthers player? I mean, who knows? Just let us know. Leave a comment. And also, go follow Keelan Blue at Keelan_12foot on Twitter. Also, Keelan, anywhere people can, anything coming up recently you want to highlight or talk about before we close?
As usual, I do baseball for Razzball as well. And I primarily pretty much only do the injury article for fantasy baseball. So come check that out every Saturday morning.
Thank you very much. Once again, I'm your host, Bobby LaMarco. That's once again Keelan. We are out of here, folks.